Welcome to Business and Burns, the Scottish Government, in partnership with Scottish Business Network and Scottish Development International and multiple Scottish organisations and sponsors, is proud to present this event. Thank you for joining us. This segment is on Scotland's role in addressing climate change. We will hear from Dr. Martin Valenti, Head of Climate Enterprise at COP26 at Scottish Enterprise, and Brandon Beach, Manager of Inward Investment for the Americas at Scottish Development International. Enjoy the programme.
Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining from today, and depending on whether you're watching this live or as a recording. For those of you who are with us live, please let us know in the comments where you're coming from. I'm always interested to see all the different countries, regions, and cities represented in this pretty expansive community. My name is Brandon Beach, representing Scottish Development International in Chicago, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this Business and Burns session on Scotland's role in addressing climate change. I'm very kindly joined by Dr. Martin Valenti, who serves as Head of Climate Enterprise and COP26 at Scottish Enterprise, and who is extremely well suited, I think, to talk not only about Scotland's place in this conversation, but also about how businesses can be a positive force for change. Martin, hello. How are you this evening?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks. I'm delighted to be here and enjoying this conversation. It's going to be really exciting.
Absolutely. And calling from Perthshire, is that correct?
It is indeed the most beautiful part of Scotland, he says, but there's equally beautiful parts all over Scotland. But at this moment, Perthshire is the most beautiful part.
No arguments for me. I'm sure we'll get some comments on that.
Sure.
So personally, I think that the timing of this session couldn't be any better. President Biden has now signaled that the US is set to rejoin the Paris Agreement. Our neighbors in Canada have laid out a net zero blueprint of their own. And Glasgow, of course, will host COP26 in November of this year. And that's all while Scottish Government's new inward investment plan specifically lays out that vision for a fair, sustainable, and inclusive low carbon future in Scotland. So, needless to say, I think we have plenty to talk about in under an hour, which we have. Before I get into those questions, Martin, is there anything you'd like to say to those joining us today and those listening from near or far?
I think what I'd like to say is that I'm slightly biased in my approach on this because I'm an absolute optimist. So I always try and see the opportunity where many people only just see challenge. And that plays a bit to Scotland's approach, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, soon. So take what I say as it's not just an optimistic person that's kind of banging the drum about being collaborative and innovative, because I will quote when asked lots and lots of facts and stats and figures to back up the things we say about Scotland and our approach here. And one thing I would say is that you really should be getting excited, because in under 10 months' time, the eyes of the world will be on Scotland. And we have to be able to stand up, stick out our chest, show our capabilities in a way we've never done before. And it's not a natural thing for a lot of people. And it's especially unnatural at a time of great the global pandemic. So it seems sometimes quite glib to speak about opportunity, but it's exactly the thing we need to speak about. We need to start speaking about hope. And I think, and hopefully we'll get into a bit about that. So I just wanted to kind of set out my caveats that I am eternal optimist. I'm a prisoner to hope, I think the term is.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to start. So let's jump straight in with COP26. Which, as mentioned, is heading to Glasgow this November. And I think probably a lot of people joining us today are at least familiar with the climate conferences. But set the scene for us a little bit. What are your views on some of the previous conferences? And what are some of the main things that we should look out for this year in particular?
It's a brilliant question. So as a number would suggest, there's been 25 that have gone before. And to be honest, 24 of them came and went and nobody really noticed because they were ultimately not successful in achieving what we needed, which was global agreements on climate change. The reason for that has been we've always pitted the environment versus the economy. It has to be one or the other. That's the big struggle, is that you can't grow your business without doubling emissions, and you can't half your emissions without crippling your business. But that's been the wrong approach, and I will demonstrate that with some practical examples soon. So if you think about the first COP was 1995 in Bonn in Germany, and a lot of the conversations were coached in an environment of combat. So it was a very combative environment. If you think about world leaders eyeballing each other around the global table saying, well, yes, the world needs, change, but I don't really want it to change, and I think you should change. And I think your economy is the wrong economy for a global partnership. So there was an awful lot of somebody had to lose for others to win type negotiations. And as a consequence, like I say, 23 of them didn't really result in anything spectacular, apart from Paris. We're all familiar with the Paris Agreement. A lot of people quote it. I mean, you mentioned earlier, fantastically, Joe Biden and John Kerry are now not just back in, they've jumped back in, which is phenomenal for the world. It's such a positive message for the world. Is that Paris, and it could be a coincidence, although I don't suspect it is, but it was the first climate conference run predominantly by women. And the unbelievably, credibly inspiring Christiana Figueres brought people together under the banner of what do we have to gain from tackling climate change as a collaboration of countries around the world, states and regions, whereas the previous ones was what do we have to lose by not addressing climate change. So it was a completely different narrative. And for businesses, that's your USP. You very rarely sell people problems to fix. You sell them opportunities to explore and opportunities to exploit and partnerships to develop. So if you think about previous 23 COPs, came and went, Paris got some really good traction, and it got people because of that. What do we have to gain from tackling climate change? An amazing work by the Paris Agreement. But since then, there's been a global pandemic. There has been, and I don't want to split the crowd, but there's been quite a different approach from the USA. If you think about Donald Trump and Joe Biden, just if you think about that for a second, is that Donald Trump was famously climate denier. Let's be honest about it. Let's be straightforward. Climate denier, pulled out of the climate agreement. Joe Biden's now there trying to create policies that's going to bring the states back together, a proper United States. But that won't last long unless he can demonstrate that surge for net zero is an economic one. Is that push to develop a green economy doesn't come at the cost of something else. So that's why I think the narrative now is all about businesses leading the net zero transition rather than governments and agencies of government saying you should do this and someone should do that. And it's something you hear a lot when you speak to people is every other sector you speak to thinks the other sector should be doing more. Somebody should do something about that. And so my message to you is, yeah, it's you. You should be doing something about that. And you should be finding people to help you. And there is no shortage of that. So the message for me for COP is that for Glasgow is that this has to be the one that goes further than Paris. This has to be the one that says, yes, we've now agreed that we have to keep emissions below a certain 1.5 degrees to save the planet. But let's be clever about it. Let's make sure we do that in a way that draws in the creativity of businesses, draws in that entrepreneurial spirit of businesses who solve problems, create markets, develop solutions. Because for 50 years since we first realized we had man's influence on the planet wasn't having a necessarily good one, we've listed all the problems. We get together and talk about how challenging it is. But if you stick with that narrative of just simply circling the wagons, listing all the problems, people younger than us, Brandon, in 15, 20 years' time will be sitting here discussing the same thing, status quo, right? So what we need now is to buckle up, join the dots, be collaborative, and be the pioneers, be that nation that says, we're going to show you how an economic success is predicated on solving environmental problems and creating well-being in our communities. So that's the big narrative. And I know it sounds a bit, highfalutin, and maybe we'll get to that in the questions, but we really have a great chance. So my message today for people listening especially is you should get excited. I know I mentioned that earlier, but you are able to influence the rest of the planet's future at this particular time. 10 months to go. If we don't stand up as a united nations, to be quite honest, and say that we're going to go for climate change and we're going to be big, we're going to be bold, we're going to be fast, we're going to be collaborative, then it isn't. There's nobody after us, I'm afraid, who's going to be able to do that. So no pressure us then.
Not at all. I'm just booking my flight to Glasgow now on the side here. So thank you for the inspiration. I'd like to stick with that theme, the economic side of things.
Yeah.
This is a business and Burns session.
It is.
And like you said, I think it's fair to say that the action of governments has historically big focus at these climate conferences in the past. But can you expand on that a little? Tell us about the specific role that business can have at the conference later this year.
I can, and I'll give you a good example. For people who have been to COP, you'll know what I mean when I speak about the green zone and the blue zone. For those who haven't, I'll explain what it is. The blue zones, so the United Nations have the blue zone at COP, and it's a heavily secured area where government and ministers and ambassadors and government agents, etc., all convene, and they have the negotiations and the discussions. And that's fine, that'll happen, and that's interesting. The really interesting is the green zone, because in the green zone is academia, businesses, investors, civic society, NGOs, and activists. So the green zone is this conscience, this mirror of the blue zone. So what we're trying to create in the green zone is an ambition loop. And I'll probably use this diagram. In the green zone, we're showing that the world can solve major challenges by being collaborative and being innovative and being big and bold and disruptive. So the people in the blue zone, when they're thinking about how tough it is, will go, well, hold on a minute. It looks like, do you know, it actually looks like we can do this. So we're trying to give them a bit of a kind of gentle nudge, like, don't wait till you've got the perfect, you know, solution. You're going to have to go, and you're going to have to go now. And it's probably best if you go together. So there's something about this ambition loop for me. So businesses, being the people in the green zone, showcasing how you can develop a hydrogen economy, showcasing how you can use former landfill sites as solar farms, showcasing how you can use abandoned mines as geothermal power stations. That is what we need to see happen. So that's the big business, but we're also needing to see every other business sector drifting towards a net zero future. Some of them will have their foot on the pedal and they will be racing towards the net zero future. And here's why. Because there's very little point in a business trying to incrementally improve its performance when some other business is taking all the business away. Classic example is HMV music stores. We're all over every town centre, they're everywhere. They've gone because people now stream your music with Spotify or Apple or some other version. So that's disruptive technology that's come into play there. So whilst the board of HMV are being very diligent and very dutiful and very, you know, executive focused about progress, they didn't see what was happening beside them. And I think businesses now need to be really, really smart and look at what the world needs from you, look at what you need from the environment, and try and come up with some net zero transition plan and do it very, very quickly. That would be my big plea. And lots of different countries have different targets. Canada, 2050. United
Sure.
Kingdom 2040, Scotland 2050, sorry, Scotland 2045. So in essence, you know, there are certain nations that are saying we're going to go a wee bit faster than you. That's really important to bear in mind, because that's where the intellectual property will be developed. That's where the solutions will be developed earlier. And so just leave that one hanging the now.
Yeah, I think we may come back to that in a bit.
We should come back to it.
I see. I'm trying to keep up with the comments, and thank you all for participating in that. You and Hunter asked a question which was very similar to one I had in mind, which is, what are some of the bigger areas of potential for Scotland's businesses in grasping the climate opportunities? And, you know, when I think of this, what are the key opportunities for Scotland as a whole, but specifically businesses that are active or looking to be active in Scotland?
Yeah. And again, we can maybe split that into big business. Hi, Ewan. I know Ewan well. So you can maybe split that into big businesses and smaller businesses, because every business needs to benefit here. This isn't a race to net zero where there's going to be losers. This is just a race. And sometimes that race is a relay. So you can help colleagues, you can help your supply chains come with you. So that's a really, really good approach. So Scotland hit the jackpot twice with their geology, you know, oil, coal. fantastic, and that was great, and it was brilliant, and it led to lots of prosperity, which in itself led to lots of great advancements in medical health and all sorts of stuff. So I'm not going to be one of these people that denies the fact the Industrial Revolution did some good, because it didn't always do good, and there's some remnants left from it that we need to get our head around. But actually, that's our next economic opportunity. So I'll come back to that, because I think the fourth Industrial Revolution will be predicated on solving the problems the first three left over. So keep that one in your mind, and maybe we'll chat about that. So at this moment, you've got, so the oil and gas thing was their first, that was their geology. Now it's their geography. You think about the hills and the wind and the wave and the tides in Scotland. These are an unbelievably untapped resource. We've got, I think it was something like 25% of the, Europe's wind capacity blown through the west coast and the east coast and the north of Scotland. So that's an untapped asset. It's not completely untapped, because we are doing amazing stuff there. And Scottish Renewables, who I hope are listening into this, are being unbelievably successful. So maybe we can chat about Scottish Renewables and the work they do. But Scotland has natural capital, we call it, Brandon, and it's a term that I'm not sure fully understood. But we've got 600,000 hectares of peatland. And for those who know about carbon sequestration, peatland is gold. And you get 600,000 hectares of it. So we need to think about how we can deploy our carbon sequestration capabilities and our other natural capital opportunities and get them into the mix. So we could talk long, all night long about that one, but I'm assuming there's lots of more questions. But suffice to say, our old abandoned mines, our geothermal power stations, all are potential landfill sites, which will ultimately be less needed because we'll be circulating more in the economy, we'll be using more products and designing out waste. At some point, these sites will become stranded assets. But why would we wait till that? Why would we not get in there now and turn them into solar farms, tackling fuel poverty, creating jobs? So there's lots of innovation that's happening in Scotland, but we need much more.
Yeah, I think that's been a theme of some of the sessions we've already heard today, and will probably continue to be. So another welcome to companies that can help provide solutions to some of these problems and take advantage of the opportunities in Scotland right now. I'm getting the sense, Martin, that you are, you mentioned it earlier, you are an optimist. I appreciate that greatly. I'm just, given the seriousness of the subject matter and the urgency with which we need to react to the climate emergency, how important is it for Scotland to make that optimism part of our message as a nation, both in the lead up to and of course during COP26 later this year?
It is the single most important element. Our approach as a nation has to be one of upbeat, ready for action, ready to collaborate, ready to take on the big issues. If we just become one of the other nations that are sitting there saying, yeah, it's really tough, isn't it? Yeah, it's hard. I wonder who's solving these problems. That is just such a missed opportunity. We need to be the Scotland that we know we were, and we know we are, and we know we will be, which is that forward-thinking, that international welcoming nation that says, we're 1/700th of the world's emissions, so why would we really bother? Well, I'll tell you why we bother. We bother because it matters, and we bother because we benefited from, the oil and gas and the coal sector in the past. So it's payback time. So we really need to be there providing lots of solutions. But let me give you a classic line. And I mentioned Christiana Figueres earlier. You can tell I'm a huge fan. And she speaks about outrage and optimism. And a lot of people will maybe follow her podcast. She is unbelievable. She speaks about Greta Thunberg and herself, and she speaks about the different viewpoints, right? And when she says that Greta's outraged, and rightfully so, because she's a young woman who's looking at a lot of really bad decisions that's happened in the past and thinking, what are you people thinking? Your house is on fire and all of that kind of stuff. But the downside to that is she's created climate anxiety. A lot of young people now are just feeling absolutely lost at sea. They're looking, going, so they're actually spending time looking to find who to blame rather than trying to find who to partner with to solve problems. So I'd love to inject a bit of optimism. So there's no point in being outraged without optimism, because that leads to defeatism. But similarly, there's no point in being optimistic without being outraged, because that leads to incremental progress. So we can't be incremental. We have to be big and bold and think really productively here. One thing I would say is that some people might be going, yeah, these are all easy things to say. Let me give you a fact that some people probably don't know. The Committee on Climate Change, independent body, give the United Kingdom the scorecard on your progress report and meeting climate change targets. in the decade 2008 to 18, Scotland, us, cut our emissions and grew our economy faster than any country in the G20. That's a staggering fact there. So right away, if I was an investor, I think that sounds like a country I should go and have a look at, because they seem to be able to tackle those big issues. And yes, they are quite a small, Northern European nation, but my goodness, they seem to be able to tackle those issues in a really collaborative fashion. So that for me is a really, really important thing. It's not just my optimism, it's the Committee on Climate Change scorecard. But I'll balance that by saying they said that the energy sector's transitioned faster than anything else, and it's been an amazing success story for Scotland. But you've got a lot of other sectors that are going the opposite way. Transport, for example, right? We still haven't yet in any way or fashion managed to crack that transport challenge. So that's a big opportunity if you're an optimist. And we've also got agriculture, we've got aquaculture. You could take a list of other sectors that only account for about 14% of our emission reduction, whereas energy is something circa 70%. So let's learn what we did in the energy sector and replicate that across all the other sectors. I'm going to try and do shorter answers, Brandon.
No, please.
You've got me on my...
We've got some time, and then that's what we're here for. So thank you. I'm getting a ton of comments, and thank you. Please keep bringing them to us. If we don't get to some of these comments or questions, we're absolutely happy to address some of them with you directly after this session. Martin, we talked about how big of an event this is and how positive this could be for Scotland and the world, really. Not sound dramatic. I think that. How is the planning coming? How is Scotland preparing for the event?
Yeah.
And what else can we expect to see? Outside of the blue and the green zones that you discussed.
Yeah, there is actually good news story there, because there's good collaboration between Scottish government, UK government, and the United Nations, and a lot of the key partners and players that feature and get involved in COP26. And it kind of happens behind the scenes because, there's a lot of stuff we need to. We had a meeting today with the key COP team for the UK government, and a lot of what we're chatting about is that because the UK are hosting COP in association with Italy, and Glasgow is the venue, so it's an unusual. So that's never happened before, and Glasgow is the kind of only place a COP's been held that isn't the kind of capital city. So there's a lot of firsts, world first for Glasgow. But if any city can make it happen, it's that dear green place, Glasgow. So be assured there that they won't let us down. They won't let the world down. They won't let anyone down. So the preparation is going well. COVID obviously has been a bit of a distraction, but actually, as it transpires, there's a lot of similarities. There's now a global desire for more collaboration, for more working with each other to support each other, depending on each other, as it were. And we've had some evidence now that governments, when they need to make big decisions, they'll do it. And when the public need to be told, they'll listen. So that makes you wonder if that maybe governments in the past haven't gone high and bold on climate change because they maybe fear it's not a vote winner. But actually, this is the time now for governments. I'm encouraging anyone from government listening. This is the time for governments to be as bold as you possibly can and be as brave as you possibly can, because the public are ready to get behind climate change, because the alternative to that is just not worth thinking about. It's so terrifying. The world's in a bad place and it needs our help.
Couldn't agree more. And I think here in the US, Scotland has a really good reputation for innovation, not to mention its history and its culture. And this kind of goes back to a point we talked about a bit at the beginning of the session, but it's also one of many small nations with ambitious low carbon and net zero objectives.
Yeah.
What sets Scotland apart from other places in Europe and then really across the world when it comes to some of these net zero and low carbon ambitions?
Do you know something? That's a brilliant question. And if you ask a Scots person that, they'll tell you something that comes straight from the heart. But I'm going to try and use the head and just explain it from a calculated position. Scotland, 1/700th of the world's emissions, yet we had the highest climate change targets in the industrialised world. We set them in Copenhagen at 42% emission reduction by 2020, and we smashed them to pieces. So we're sitting somewhere near 50, 51 now. So if anything, we weren't ambitious enough then. So that's a little footnote for us. Maybe when we felt we were being too ambitious, we weren't ambitious enough. So that's just a little reminder for people. We have a history of, as you say yourself, everyone knows about Scotland's innovators and engineers. You could list them all day long, from Dunlop to Lord Kelvin. You could list them all day long about the innovators. But one thing I would think that we should be thinking about is that history has taught us that we have the capabilities. Where we are now is more important than history. Where we are now is we need to reimagine Scotland 2021. What does the Scotland bring to the world? We did bring all of those things. That's great. Well done. Fantastic. Let's move on. What is the next big story for Scotland on this planet of ours? It is, as it would happen, so saving the planet. I know that sounds melodramatic because it's meant to. If COP doesn't happen as a successful outcome, I really worry. Not just, I mean, I'm getting old now, so I'll probably manage to just skirt on by it. But for young people, you know, that it's really going to get much tougher out there, and it's going to get much more combative and much more. Some people speak about COVID as a consequence of climate change, with encroaching on biodiversity and messing with nature too much. So there's an awful lot of things that's still going to be unpacked in front of our eyes that isn't going to be pleasant. But we have, like I say, we've got, so some things I was saying I was going to use ahead. We've got probably the greatest environmental protection agency on the planet, literally, because our environmental protection agency, many countries have an EPA, but Scotland's one as Terry Ahern's the chief executive, and at our key purpose is to protect and enhance the environment. But we want to do that in ways that develop and support inclusive growth and well-being. You have a look around the world. No other agency has that as their statutory purpose, so that's really important. We have more academic institutes per head of population than any country in the world. We've got 19 Avengers Assemble, if you want to use it that way, universities, each with their own phenomenal expertise that we can draw on. We've got 7 innovation centres. I call them the Magnificent Seven. We've got Poonam Malik, who I know was involved earlier. That's all you need to be a successful country, is to have Poonam Malik there. Trust me, that's all you need. We've got Russell Dalgleish and the great team at Scottish Business Network. But we've got to now start believing, this is my big key message for everyone, is that when things get tough, you either worry about what could go wrong or you focus on getting it fixed. We now need to switch from the nation that worried about not getting it right and just only focus on being a relentless, dynamic, creative, going for it big time. And the more we do that, the more people will go, I like what's happening in Scotland, let's get involved there. And if Scotland didn't take that approach, I can imagine COP26 being catastrophically failure, because someone has to be that pioneer. Someone has to be the hope in amongst all the Climageddon. Someone has to be there showcasing the opportunities from tackling climate change, not just the problems that have to be managed. And again, I take you back to Paris and Christiana Figueres. You know, the only reason that one worked is she spoke about what do we have to gain. This one has an even better narrative. This is about what do we have to gain together, because we know that we are all going to lose if we don't collaborate. Climate change is so interconnected and multifactorial and multidimensional. So there's no one size fits all approach. That's just never going to work. So we need to do this together as systems. And I actually don't think there's many countries in the world that do systems thinking like Scotland. That's why I think we're in the best place to do it, Brandon, with our international partners, of course.
Fantastic. And I want to come back just to a point that you mentioned in that, and that I think I saw in the comments earlier, and it's around, you know, social inclusion and this concept of a just transition, you know, thinking about those two in a complementary way based on the way that we're approaching COP26. How do you feel that those play together along with our ambitions for 2045 and for 2030?
I think it's almost, if you didn't have a just transition, if you didn't have inclusion and well-being, it's almost pointless doing it in the first place. You know, what is the point? And I've seen it tweeted quite a lot. What's the point in having a thriving business on a dead planet? I think Alan Jope from Unilever says that, Glaswegian. Just thought I'd mention that. In fact, lots of great people in climate change at Glaswegian. Chris Stark from Committee on Climate Change. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Glaswegians are going to save the planet. So the point being there is that it's really important that we don't lose sight of the just transition, because somebody asked me once, how do you describe a just transition? I'll say, I'll tell you what, I'll describe an unjust transition and you can figure it out from there. An unjust transition is where I grew up. I grew up in a former mining village. And when society has said to the coal sector, actually, you guys are bad, you cause problems and pollution, you can leave, okay? And they left, but they left without clearing up the mess. They left major social, economic, environmental challenges. You just need to drive around one of these former mining towns in the UK and probably the US too, and you'll see, a city or a town or a village that has the heart ripped out of it. You've got intergenerational unemployment, social, economic, environmental decline, and unbelievable mental health issues. That is an unjust transition. Now, success, you try telling people in an unjustly transitioned town, woohoo, we've meet our climate change targets. And they're going, really? Is it worth it? Is that what we're doing this for? Is that what this endeavor is about? It's about someone being able to tick a box somewhere. For me, there is only one point in solving the climate crisis, is if it helps society. Seriously, because if it doesn't help society, it is almost not worth doing, in my personal view.
And in working for SDI, I think that's been one part that I've been so proud to represent Scotland on behalf of, is that genuine aim of inclusion and this just transition that I think, frankly, we could probably learn a bit from here in the US. And I think we are starting to work on a bit more. But it's one of the main themes for me this year leading up to COP26 is that this isn't just about renewable energy. It's about the communities that are being affected and how we can do this in a really holistic way. And I think Scotland's setting a really good example for that.
Yeah.
Can I also ask, again, thinking about a lot of the positive things happening right now, we have these ambitious objectives of, reaching, I think it's 50% of our energy consumption from renewable sources by 2030, the 2045 net zero objective you mentioned earlier. Do you have one or two examples, Martin, of projects happening right now in Scotland that give you a particular sense of pride or hope when it comes to reaching some of those ambitions?
I do, and actually I started to think about some of them today, and I was making, so you notice I never use notes because I'm very short-sighted. If I try and see my notes, I'll end up getting lost. But let me just tell you about some. So there's some things which are so well known in Scottish whiskey, for example, right? Whiskey, some other countries think they invented it, Ireland, for example, you didn't. Let's be honest, it was Scotland. So if you think about Scottish whiskey and you think about that as a sector, the beautiful thing about the Scottish whiskey sector is, and when you look at them, there's so many different brands and so many different bits and pieces behind the scenes. They're the most collaborative sector I've ever known. They work steadfastly behind the scenes, collaborating on solving environmental problems. So the environment is not a competitive part of their business. And in doing that, they'll save money, they'll share resources, they'll expedite some solutions faster than they would have tried to do on their own. But when it comes to the shop front, they're still, my whiskey's better than their whiskey. So there's something there about that collaboration on the environment and competition for everything else. That's a good, healthy business perspective. The whiskey sector at this moment, it sells itself, and always has done, on this idyllic picture of the glens with the stag and all that stuff, and it's not always the case, because when you go to some of these distilleries, it's just a big plant. It just looks like a massive big plant with steam belting out and heat belting out there. But yesterday, as it happens, perfect timing, or the day before, it might have been, the Scottish Whisky Association, weren't circling the wagons. They were pioneers and said, what the world needs from whiskey? That needs net zero whiskey. So let's give it to them, and let's give it to them fast. So yesterday, the Scottish Whisky Association came out with a strategy, which is a collaboration, that the sector will be net zero by 2040. So that next time you pour a glass of whiskey and that bit of guilt, you think, oh, I wonder if this has caused some kind of pollution to the environment. Be assured that sector is working towards that being net zero, and then ultimately zero. So I'm very, very proud of the Scottish Whisky Association. And again, back to the point I mentioned about SEPA, the Scottish EPA, they work closely. They weren't just the bad guys coming in with high-vis jackets pointing at things that should be fixed. They were sitting, and chatting about, what's your big idea? Let's think about how we can help you solve some of these problems. So it's been really, really helpful. And Ardbicki, one of the best distillers, I love Ardbicki, and I hope some of the guys are on here watching tonight, produced the world's first carbon positive gin. It's not my wife didn't need much of an incentive to drink gin, but now that she knows if she drinks more, she's actually saving the planet. So that's going to be something that I'll have to try and counter. And they also made the world's first rye Scotch whiskey. And I actually made some list of it. We've got Beatrice, the world's first deep water offshore wind farm. We've got the first continuous green hydrogen production in the EMEC up north. There is so many different initiatives to list. But one that really excites me is because Scotland gave the world the rubber tyre way back in 1837, I think it was, John Boyd Dunlop. So it's payback time. So with Scotland, you've got a big problem with tyres being dumped, and you can never actually do anything once they've been baked. But there's a company in Scotland called Recircle, it's even better name, and they're developing a really novel technology for de-galvanizing the tyres and taking them back to the constituent parts. I mean, it might look like a small business doing that. That is a global game changer. That changes how the world views tyres. And maybe we should create a Scottish tyre, put a little Sol tyre on it. A Sol tyre, see what I did there? Anyway, that joke was ruined. And then sell the world again tyres. But this time, that tyre, it's a circular economy. I could be here all day with these jokes, Brandon.
Please keep going.
I won't bother your audience will be now jumping, watching EastEnders. So there's so many small businesses that are coming up with big ideas, and there's so many big companies collaborating with small businesses. The thing I love most about being involved in this ecosystem in Scotland is you're one phone call or two phone calls away from someone that will say, I'll help you with that. So that is fantastic. That network we've got and the network that you work with across the ocean is just fantastic. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, declared my interest for Canada, is that Comrie in Perthshire is twinned with Carleton Place in Canada. And the village every year has a Canada Day. It's got a big Canadian flag and a Sol tyre. So I'll maybe take a picture of it the next time it happens, and I'll share it with some of your
there
visitors.
We go. Lot of cross transatlantic relationships. You mentioned that one. I know we've got Pittsburgh and Glasgow recently formalized relationships. San Diego and Edinburgh, I believe. So good to see some of those relationships starting to bloom a bit. And by the way, we're here all day for the tire puns, Martin.
Sorry about that.
Are never too many.
They get tiring after a while. That was my last one. I promise that was the last one.
There it is. Did you have these written down? I don't know. Anyway, no. Well, one of my last questions as we start to wind down here is, I guess, a call to action a bit. What would you want to say to businesses looking to get involved, and how can they show capabilities, not just in Scotland, but to the world during COP26 later this year?
Yeah. There's formal ways to get involved. There's a website link that I sent to Russell later, so we maybe stick it on the Scottish Business Network side. Then it's just as the Cabinet Office in UK government, ping them details and say, I want to get involved in COP to do X, Y, and Z. So that's the formal route. The informal route is probably more exciting, because the informal route is just show up. I don't mean show up in Glasgow, but just show up. Just say, do what the whiskey sector did the other day. Hello world, we're ready to make our entire sector net zero 5 years earlier than it's legislatively required in Scotland. That's leadership. So I think what we want to see now is that a lot of businesses, so we get a three-prong approach. So if your members think about these three areas that I want to socialise, Scotland is the country whose businesses understand the net zero transition and are on that racetrack. They're going for it because they are Spotify, they're not HMV, right? And they want to do that collaboratively and together. And I mentioned earlier about the EPA and some of the support, the universities, the innovation centres, the research pools. We've got everything at our disposal. We've got 3 economic agencies. You've literally got everything. And I mentioned earlier, you've got Poonam, and if you want to do some thinking about things, you've got Jamie Cook and Catherine Trebek. We've got access to everything we need now. There's literally, this is the no excuse era. This is it. No one can say, well, you didn't have to. Yes, we do. Well, you weren't able to do that. Yes, we were. Well, there's not enough money. There's loads of money. The world has lots of investment looking for a home. So let's make sure they come here to Scotland. So the big message for me is that we have to showcase that mindset. The mindset isn't of, and this is the Glasgow words, apologise, feared. That means we're not afraid, right? We're not afraid of the big challenges. We're not going to look over our shoulders to find somebody to solve these problems for us. We didn't in the past. We're not going to do it now. And we certainly shouldn't be known as a country who had COP in one of our greatest cities, and we missed the opportunity. So businesses, if you're speaking about net zero transition, we want to know about you. If you're speaking about just transition, I'm desperately keen to know about you. I want to know what your just transition story is. Did you have an old mill that you're now converting into something else and you want to use? And today, the Scottish Cabinet Secretary spoke about a new jobs green fund, £100 million green jobs, and there was a green task force, a green jobs task force academy, I think the term was. So there's all sorts of support being set up for you there. We just need the ideas, we need the visionaries and the entrepreneurs. And then that last part is, if Scotland gets that just transition right, and we're leading the net zero transition, that's going to set us up for investment. Because one point that the Committee on Climate Change did subtly say is, if you really want to transition your economy to be the world's first net zero economy, and we do, and we can, then you're going to have to draw in investment. And investors do not buy concepts. They don't buy concepts of sustainability, they buy prospects. So we need to get ourselves into a position where we can say, you need to cut 10 million tons from your thing. There's a nature-based solution over here in the Pentland Hills, or there's a nature-based solution here on the island of Islay, or what. So we need to get ourselves into the space of being able to develop nature-based solutions, deploy them at the right place. We've got the brilliant regulatory agency who you only need to go in and say, listen, I'm wanting some big ideas about how to transition my business. They will help you. You've got the economic agency. So, and maybe that should be one of the points. Somebody can maybe tweet that, or I'll do it later. This is the no excuse era. We can't sit and say, well, if only we had this at our disposal. We have it. It's now time to step up and start deploying what we know we can be, Brandon. That sounds like a bit of a call to action, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. I was going to also ask if you have any final message, but I don't know how we could top all of what you've just said as a call to action for everyone that's joined us today. I thank you so much for that inspiring message and for everything that you've covered on the session, Martin. I'm just trying to we do have to close off pretty shortly here. I was trying to keep up with the questions. It's a good problem to have. We had so many comments and so much participation. So thank you all for joining and for participating. One question I did note down here was just about the size of Scotland, and I apologize to whoever mentioned this. I forget who it was, but does the fact that we're smaller in size as a nation make us more nimble? What opportunities does that present for us when it comes to making a difference in this space?
It's don't tell anyone about it, but it's our top strength. It really is to our advantage. We can keep ourselves, quite collaborative together. I mean, like I say, the calls that I've had, and you've probably had, and people in the Scottish Business Network are amazing at doing that. You can get ministers, politicians, you can get academics, you can get civic society, you can get NGOs around a table like that. In fact, we did it when Christiana Figueres, name drop, when she came to Edinburgh a few years ago to do something for us. We gave her the Edinburgh Medal, and I've convened a table. And at that table, I had airports, WWF, the Crown Estate. I had a range of businesses around the table who were all going, I've never met you before. We usually exchange insults over the internet, and I said the only way to solve this problem is collaborative. So that was my last big message, and I'm glad you reminded me, is that do not ever think for a second you're going to do this on your own, because you won't. It is too big. This is a systems change, so you require a systems approach. Scottish Business Network are a great systems connector, so always try and find someone. They're probably on this chat line now, someone there to be able to help you with some of your problems. And I'll maybe finish with, because my mother was from Ireland, my father was from Italy, although I'm a passionate Scot, who could tell? And a famous Irish poet, Margaret Mead, said, all you ever need to change the world is a small group of committed people. In fact, that's all that ever works. So that's Scotland in a nutshell.
Absolutely. So inspiring. Thank you, Martin. I think what you've talked about today gives everyone listening not only food for thought, but hopefully some inspiration and some specific action items that a lot of our business partners can follow up on, and some of our friends in the diaspora and alumni community as well. So speaking of which, if you are a business that's looking to either work with innovative Scottish companies in your home market, or if you're looking to grow your business overseas and possibly take part in COP26 later this year, please do reach out to Martin or myself. I'm actually just one of over 30 people based across North America who are here to support trade investment between the Americas and Scotland. I think, echoing what Martin said, if there's one thing I'd like everyone to take away from the session, it's that Scotland is at the fore of this fight against climate change. And if you're an innovative company providing solutions for these issues, we really hope that we can work with you. So thank you everyone for joining today. Thank you, Martin. Actually, thanks to our partners at SBN and Scottish Government. Please stay well, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you in Glasgow later this year.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.